You. So come and sit down and we'll get going.
Do you know how to find my talk on this?
No, I wouldn't have a clue.
Oh.
NZAS. There, try that. So there you go.
Oh, there we go. I'll sit down before you do your intro.
Right, I'm the chairperson for this session, everyone. My name's Hamish Campbell and I'm on the NZAS Council. And one of my roles there is to head up the editorial subcommittee, and we produce this thing. Everybody aware of it?
Yes.
I heard a few voices. I was really pleased to hear the Minister this morning talking about Auckland and geology. I'm a geologist, and in this lovely latest issue of Science Review, we've got an excellent article on the Devora project and the current state of knowledge of the Auckland volcanic field. I'll leave it at that. All right, now we've got 4 invisible scientists whom we're now going to hear from, and they've got 20 minutes each, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Pamela Mace from MPI, and the talk is Perceptions and Misconceptions about the State of New Zealand's Fisheries. Pamela.
Thank you.
And I'm going to be a stricter chairman than the last one. 20 minutes each, and hopefully 15 so we can have some questions. There's a challenge.
I didn't know I was on Invisible Science, but in some ways this is what this talk is about. I'm a scientist who's going to be trying to give you a positive view of fisheries, which is contrary to what you may have seen, what you will have seen, I would think, in the media, particularly the last few years. So I'll talk a little bit about the actual perceptions that are out there, give you one slide which is a global overview, talk about what's happening in developed countries, summarise the status of New Zealand fisheries in New Zealand, talk about common misconceptions, contrast terrestrial versus marine situations, and of course give some conclusions. So, perceptions. You're probably aware that Lincoln University does a triennial public perceptions of New Zealand's environment, and the last one that they completed was in 2016. And what it found, which is quite consistent with what previous ones have found, is air and native bush and forests perceived to be in the best condition, rivers, lakes and wetlands, and marine fisheries perceived to be in the worst state. And most respondents considered the condition of New Zealand's native land and freshwater plants and animals to be adequate or good, which is significantly at odds with reports from the Department of Conservation and MFE. I really admire what DOC is doing on a very limited budget, trying to bring species back from the brink of extinction. I think they're doing an admirable job, but not one single marine fish or shellfish species in New Zealand is even remotely on the brink. A little bit more from Lincoln's survey. So one thing I won't cover and I can't explain is they went from paper surveys in the beginning to electronic, and things went dramatically down. They didn't give a reason for that, and I can't either. But just showing you that, you know, how different things are, I would say that, I mean, I mostly want to compare native terrestrial plants and animals with marine fisheries, and there you can see that they are perceived both in the past and present to be doing much better than marine fisheries. Our coastal waters and beaches, which I also added in here, are perceived to be doing extremely well, despite all of the sedimentation, pollution, dumping, problems and so forth. And this is the quality or condition of those things. This is the quality of management. The quality of fisheries management is perceived to be very, very poor. The quality of management of our native plants and animals is perceived to be, well, it's actually perceived to be mostly adequate or good. Another way of looking at this is to look at, here I lumped those two, quality or condition and quality of management into one, and also grouped together good and very good and bad and very bad, and compared them here. What's missing from this graph is the category called adequate, which actually didn't have much variation across these factors. It varied from about 31 to 35%. So again, looking at native land plants and animals, on balance, more people think they're doing really well than poorly, and it's the other way around for fisheries. So why is this? It is amazing to me, and part of it is the way fisheries is portrayed in the media. So, for example, if you look at the global statistics, this is FAO statistics, they haven't really changed that much in recent years, but the most recent report has the underfished component. This is for the world's major target fisheries, as being around 10.5%, fully fished 58%, overfished 31%. This is the appropriate way of representing it, but this is the way that it's generally represented in the media. They say almost 90% of our fisheries are in trouble. What fully fished means is they're being optimally managed in a sustainable way. Now, it's not to say that things are great, because having this many as being in an overfished state is not great. And there are some regions that are actually not doing well. This includes much of, or almost all of Asia, parts of Africa, and some but not all parts of the high seas. However, developed countries, I include New Zealand here, is generally performing well and getting better. And so I'll show you that in the next few slides. This is the US, which is one country that is doing well. Their fish stock sustainability index has been increasing, although it's potentially showing signs of plateauing. And it's complicated the way this index is derived, but basically the US has poured enormous amounts of money into its science and its fisheries management, and is doing, and that's reflected in this score. Another way of looking at this, they classify their stocks according to whether the overfishing is occurring, which is a rate of extraction that's too high, or the population is overfished, which means it's too low. So in 2016, 9% of stocks subject to overfishing and 38% overfished. These are the comparable figures for New Zealand. I must say though that this is only their major stocks, whereas this is all of our scientifically evaluated stocks. We're comparable in terms of overfished. We look to be higher in terms of overfishing, and I'll show you our stats in a bit more detail a couple of slides on. The EU has enormous fisheries management problems. You've got all those adjacent countries all vying for what they consider to be their share of the pie, and it always adds up to more than 100%. So their progress has actually been a lot later than in either the US or in New Zealand. However, they have been making progress. So this is fishing mortality. They've for the 85 major stocks, and this is for the year 2014, and fishing mortality has, this is the optimal, by the way, this horizontal line is the optimal level, so it is way above optimal levels, way too high for quite a long period of time. It's now dropped precipitously, and there's always a lag in the response of the biomass to reductions in fishing mortality. But, you know, in more recent years, that's been improving a lot, and the EU is now seeing quite enormous progress. New Zealand's situation, I'll just give you a quick summary. We do scientific evaluations for what we hope is a progressively greater number of stocks every year. So scientifically evaluated stocks, they account for 72% of the tonnage, 79% of the value of landings. Record number this year, although it only went up by, 2 or 3, but we try and increase it every year. Of those, in terms of stocks, scientifically evaluated stocks that have no sustainability issues, it's 133 stocks that do have sustainability issues, it's 27. 83% of scientifically evaluated stocks have no sustainability issues. What we need to do with these ones is simply reduce the catches to rebuild, or in extreme cases, we close fisheries to enhance the fastest rate of reboarding. Put corrective management and action place for all of these stocks, and it takes time, but we have had quite a few success stories. Show you it in a little bit more detail. This is a complicated graph. We've actually got 4 performance metrics: the soft limit, the hard limit, overfishing, and the management target. Management target is maximum sustainable yield. Overfishing means a rate of extraction that's too high. A hard limit is the worst situation of all, which is where a stock has gotten so low that you should consider closing it. And the soft limit, this is the what's equivalent to the term overfished. And this is the main metric that we use. So green is good. Yellow is okay. Being below the management target, though, isn't a bad thing. You expect stocks to fluctuate around their targets. Orange is getting worse, and red is the actual bad situation. In terms of the number of stocks, we do increase the number of stocks that assessed each year or scientifically evaluated. In terms of number of stocks, these non-green parts look bigger, but in terms of the volume of landings, this is influenced by a lot of very small stocks. In terms of volume of landings, they don't make up much. In particular, the stocks that are in bad shape, the red ones, don't make up much of the landings at all because they've mostly been closed or had their total allowable catches severely reduced. So the point here is that of the scientifically evaluated landings, 97% have no sustainability issue, which I think is a pretty good result. However, what we usually hear in the media in particular, but also from some of those other activists who may have lost their scientific objectivity, in my view anyway, is that just because a stock is, they often characterize a stock that's below the management target as endangered, collapsed, in trouble, or on the brink of extinction, when in fact, as I mentioned, we expect stocks to fluctuate around their management target. So being below is not a bad thing. In fact, you expect them to be below about half of the time, and they're only below about 25 to 30% of the time. But the other point is that even stocks that are overfished or depleted are always vastly more abundant than endangered terrestrial species. Next slide, I pick out a few examples of stocks that have been taken, of land species that have been taken off the endangered species list, and they're all from 2016 as it happened. There have been some, what have been called conservation success stories in recent years. So terrestrial species no longer classified as endangered. Most of these are under the United States Endangered Species Act. Grizzly bears have increased to 700 to 1,000. So that's considered good enough to call them not endangered. Green sea turtles, at least in Florida, 2,250 nesting females, no longer endangered. Manatees, 6,000, no longer endangered. White-tailed deer in the US, 1,000 now. Giant pandas have increased to about 1,860 adults, maybe 2,000 in total. They've been taken off the IUCN Red List, no longer considered to be endangered. Just because they've been taken off the list of the endangered category, it just means they've been downgraded, or if you like, upgraded, away from extinction. So they still have some kind of a threat status in the US and other places. There still are some kind of protections, but they're considered to be in a relatively good state. Let's take a fisheries example. Northern cod, Newfoundland cod, is often considered to be a typical example of a fishery. It crashed this is landings, it crashed in the early 90s. A moratorium was put on in 1992 for no fishing. There actually has been some fishing, you just can't see it on this axis very well. But they've been doing, Canada's considered to do surveys every year, and we're now in a situation where the latest stock assessment in 2016 showed that the stock is at least potentially on the road to recovery. I think the jury's still out as to whether or not it's coming back, and it's mostly environmental, by the way. In any case, it's not considered to be in a good state at the point that it's at now. Not considered to be in a good state at all, but even so, there are an estimated 894 million cod out there. So you're just talking completely different numbers. We're saying poor status, 894 million, good status, 1,000. Now, okay, part of that's the difference between fish and mammals, so, you know, you've got to take that into account as well. Orange roughy, and I've just taken the figures from 2013 because that was before our most recent updated assessments that indicate that some of the major orange roughy stocks have recovered. So this is prior to recovery, and this is just all the different stocks. I won't go through them, but it's a low productivity fish species. Even so, when they were considered to be depleted, and almost all of them were considered to be depleted in 2013, still 165.5 million. So even for a low productivity species, and the numbers that you're talking about are quite amazing. And I should say that most of the fisheries for these stocks were closed for a period of time, or else severely reduced in size. It's also true that marine stocks have a tremendous capacity to rebuild. So my favourite example is Georges Bank scallops off of the east coast of the United States. So this is fishing mortality in the red. It got to absolutely phenomenally high, ridiculously high levels in the early 90s. It had been going up. The stock had been low for as long as the stock had been assessed. There was some concerted effort to put in place management with teeth in around 1994, and the fishing mortality plummeted. The biomass in the blue responded very quickly because scallops are relatively short-lived. So over a period of only 9 years, the stock size increased 23-fold, and it's now usually in first, or at least in the top 3 most valuable species, fish species in the US. We've also got a homegrown example, which is hokey. It got to be quite low, particularly in the West, when there was 7 consecutive years of very poor recruitment to the fishery, very poor reproductive success, and the quotas were reduced from 250,000 down to 90,000 in several steps, and the stock has now responded and is well above the target zone. So that's just a kind of a quick tour of just trying to say that, well, I probably have glossed over, there are negative things happening in that marine environment. Absolutely, there are negative things. But I'm trying to say that fisheries, at least the direct impacts of fishing, the direct impacts of fishing on fish and shellfish stocks are doing well. And in New Zealand, things are doing extremely well. So just to conclude, New Zealand fisheries are performing well overall. There are issues, including many things I haven't discussed. I mean, I'm trying to outline the positives more so than the negatives. These need to be acknowledged and addressed, and they are being, perhaps not as fast as what some people would like. Marine resources can still be managed for food, livelihoods and sustainability, as opposed to many terrestrial native resources that require restoration. And in many cases, and New Zealand is, one of the prime examples, they're being rescued from the verge of extinction. But, I don't really need to tell this audience this, but don't believe everything you see, hear or read about the status of fisheries in popular media. Sometimes it's balanced, but unfortunately that seems to be becoming more and more rare that that's the case, and there's obviously a need to take an analytical and objective approach. So thank you.
Great, well, we've got time for questions. Yes?
One thing that strikes me is that when you look at the animals on the endangered species list, they were not species to eat.
Sorry,
We can't hear.
Okay. So
they were not species that.
spoke about the endangered
Yeah.
animals. Those were not species we eat. But when you spoke about fish, those were species that we, as a group, eat. Now,
Well, one of the.
a billion hokey, right?
Yeah.
But if a nation like Japan ate 6 hokey per year per individual, that's a billion hokey. They're all gone. So the scale of the drain on those resources is also sort of significantly different orders of magnitude.
Actually,
So the balance is actually pretty critical here.
I agree, and I also pointed out that comparing mammals with fish is not not a direct comparison. But the deer that were mentioned are actually a species that was and is eaten. So that's not totally your point's not totally valid. But yeah, I think I was pointing out what do we consider to be endangered. So, but what happens with fisheries when we say that they're overfished, and in particular using what we call the hard limit in New Zealand, we close the fisheries and they can rebound extremely quickly, more quickly than what terrestrial animals can, for example. So yeah, you wouldn't have every person in China eating 6 hokey a year, because we wouldn't allow that many to be caught.
Yes.
Just wondering, have you got any examples or instances of marine fish species actually being driven to complete extinction?
Oh, well, that was a point I meant to make. Apparently there is one. Someone told me about it, but I forget what it is. So marine fish species and shellfish species, very few, maybe one, maybe 2, I don't know. Marine mammals is a completely different story, and that is something that is not, I didn't include here because that's overall not really a positive story. It is, again, one of those issues that need to be acknowledged and addressed, and we need to be doing what we can to increase the size of marine mammal stocks. There have been there have been quite a few success stories there as well. Yeah.
Thanks, Peter Griffin from the Science Media Centre. Thanks, Callum. Very interesting. There's obviously a disconnect between the evidence base that you've identified and are working from and the public perception of the integrity of our fisheries management, and that's played out over the last year very prominently in the media. I'm just wondering what MPI has done reflecting on all of that, because the media is going to continue to be a really important channel in moulding public perception and opinion on this subject. What if, with all that's gone out around Oculus and even academics sort of at loggerheads over this issue, presenting different types of evidence, what have you learned internally? What's MPI going to do to try and improve the situation with the media?
Well, I probably can't speak on behalf of all of MPI because my role is just the science. What we are hoping to do, and what I'm hoping MPI will do, is to get more proactive stories out there. Not stories that are spin, you know, that just talk about the good things, but more balanced stories, and that where there are issues, talk about what we're doing to address them. Yeah.
Last question.
Yeah. Really interesting and really heartwarming. But one of the things that's interested me is krill, which are not seen as a fish they used to, but now we're learning to send, apparently Norwegians send great big ships down to the Antarctic, and probably the bottom of the beginning of the food chain, or seaweed can start to be harvested, which actually could really change ecosystems, because comparing terrestrial versus fish, we don't normally mess with the environment, but as we start to get, well, we do in some ways in pollution, but I mean,
And on terrestrial, you don't mess with the environment?
No, terrestrial, we do mess with the environment.
Oh, okay.
In the marine, we can't mess with the Pacific Ocean quite the same
Oh, I see
way.
what you mean, yeah.
But as we start to learn how to harvest some of those things, like krill, like seaweed, whatever, are we in danger of all of a sudden being caught out, and actually a billion fish could disappear because the beginning of the food chain is going to take.
In my view, it doesn't really matter what part of the food chain you're taking food from. What matters is how effective your management is, and the in the Antarctic, CAMLR has to be one of the most successful international management organisations. Convention for the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources. So I would be fairly confident. I mean, they're the first entity to take an ecosystem approach. Antarctic toothfish is actually one of the, if not the best fish managed fishery in the world, then in the top 5. They've done a stupendous job with it. So I wouldn't worry so much about that. There are lots of models that say, you know, what are the implications of exploiting different parts of a food chain. Some say leave all the large predators, take the lower levels. Actually, the models tell you almost anything you want them to tell you because they're so complex. But you know, I think it's how good is the management entity, and I could put up a list of the ones I wouldn't trust, and I could put up a list of the ones I would trust. So, CAMLR I would though.
Okay. Thank you, Pamela. That was
Happy
a
to take any
fascinating
more
talk.
questions.
I'll ask you about Toaroa later. All right. Our next speaker, Graham LeGros. I should introduce you.
Yeah.
Graham's from the Mulligan Institute, and the topic is the role of independent research organisations in the New Zealand science ecosystem.
You need to help me change. Here I'm challenged. I don't know
Oh,
yeah, that's good. I like that.
where do we go? End of slideshow. And get out of that. There.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks NZAS for inviting me to talk. And I've got to find the thing here. I'll try and get through things reasonably crisply so we can actually talk quick to questions later. Taken on a big title, the role of independent research institutes, and I'm not going to speak for independent research institutes in New Zealand because we don't know where all of them are. They're actually, some of them are quite invisible, but they actually play a very important role. I'd like to just quickly sort of go through and just introduce how independent research institutes can look around the world, and then I want to get to a little bit about how the one that I'm involved with, the Mulligan Institute, and that Mike Burge's involved with, how that's actually was born, raised, and what the role it does play in the New Zealand health science ecosystem. And perhaps we can talk a little bit about later on about what New Zealand should actually be doing about its independent research organisations. And I'll just try and showcase some positive things and some things that should be happening. What is the global role? Most developed countries actually have a very positive attitude towards independent research institutes, and they've found one or other mechanism to really drive their development and make sure that, as well as CRI equivalents and university equivalents, one of the most powerful and potent ways of actually getting value out of your science is actually through independent research organisations. If I just start with the states over there, I can name them. There's the Howard Hughes, the White Institute, various forms, often funded by people with large egos and big pocketbooks to really drive the best that science can achieve in a specific area. The Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute's another one. It's not just health. Across the spectrum, with the Americans really trying to drive and use the power of an independent institute to really bring like-minded people together and focus full-time on research without the trappings or the distractions of teaching or those other things. So they become, and they actually do a scorecard, if you like, in America, how many Nobel Prize winners, how many patentable discoveries. You'll find the ratios in those organisations far outweigh any university department, or et cetera, et cetera. Moving across the Atlantic, you can go to the UK. They have a slightly sort of mixed model of semi-government supported independent institutes or private institutes. But in Germany, you've got the full Max Planck Institutes where they take across the whole spectrum. And that's a fantastic body of organisations where they're all set up. They're funded by a mixture of state and federal government, but they're completely independent with that independent mission to go and do research and the best research you can in a particular area. And if you just go to the Max Planck website, you just see it. It's a daunting just what they're prepared to take on in a basic setting, etc. France, quite a different sort of way, very centralised, very old-fashioned government thing, but centrally government-supported institutes doing basic research, independent of universities and all the issues of teaching, etc. Singapore has been dabbling in some sort of more commercial model. I wouldn't call them independent institutes because they're very linked to the government priorities and commercial, but they are something like that. Australia, our dear friend Australia, they have supported independent institutes as an essential part of their ecosystem for many years, and it goes way back 100 years really. And they actually have a federal funding program to half support any independent institute which meets a certain criteria to make sure that they are alive and well, and they're mixed across all the different science sectors. Now, New Zealand, poor New Zealand. We do suffer the tyranny of distance and the fact that for a number of years we've always managed to dob into the UK model, the US model. We actually only had, until very recently, only about 2 million people. Hard to drive universities and CRIs, let alone independent institutes. But we're now 4 million people. And I suppose a little bit where I come from is I never wanted to work in a university. There's nothing wrong with them. I've got trained at a university. I never wanted to work in a CRI, and I've worked in a CRI. I like the idea of an independent institute being, it just scratches my itches that you really want to, but I suppose it's for the kind of people that need to focus, probably slightly introverted people that don't need the stimulus of students and blah, 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 but you want to do something with your science. CRIs want to do something with their science, but they're big mission-led. Independent people, they've got to do something now, so they tend to be impatient. And they tend to be also linked to hope. So let's just go to the Mulligan Institute, and it's a typical sort of funded on a vision of bringing hope and opportunity for people. Mr. Mulligan, that's Len Mulligan, he is the founder of Tip Top Ice Cream, and his wife, they believed old-fashioned kind of community. Wellington here, we've never been blessed with a strong medical research universities here, and Len was getting sick with cancer, but they felt that when they had enough money for their family, they should invest in the community, and they thought at that time health was a really important part of what we're experiencing. Remember, polio, all those things with childhood illnesses, really important issue. So they put some money aside to foster and found an independent research institute, and they really believed in that more commercial focused model. And that's where it started. And where are we now? We've got 90 plus staff. We've got that state-of-the-art building we rent off the university, iconic. We're still an independent charity, very fierce independent, which means we can do what we want to do. And we have a funding mix of contestable grants about 85% and philanthropy about 15%. Now, I've got to tell the honest truth. We have managed to create, and I'm talking about Mike and myself here, and Franca and Ian, a strong independent institute because the government funding model of paying full cost overheads for a period of time, not anymore, but for a period of time through the HRC grants enabled scientists to win grants and then pay for their business activities for a while. So now it's really essential we have philanthropy coming in to take on that extra cost because the grants are capped and it's no longer full cost funding model quite. It's sort of this funny thing where it's just all a bit tense. And we do about 10 million per annum on research activity, and we try and do everything which is important, and we get informed by the community, what they care about, whether it's cancer. We can't just go wandering off and do completely our other thing, but we try and do our basic stuff. So why we're here and actually what guides us, there has to be potential for major breakthroughs and new treatments. We try and represent something for world-class medical research in New Zealand. There's a feeling now, I think, in New Zealand, as we get to 4 million people, we've been reminded by the Poms, by the Yanks, not at the moment by Asia, but we are alone down here. We have to start looking at our own nation and what we build here. We cannot rely on the Australians, for instance, to do everything for us. They also, they see themselves as independent from us. So I think there's a lot of nation building going on at how we build our institutions in a more careful, qualified way of what we need, and the science sector is very much part of that. Our Royal Society is stronger. We're actually looking to ourselves to try and build a proper environment now. And of course, an independent institute, I passionately believe, is an important instrument that we're actually missing and don't have enough of. Just quickly, the focus is on the immune system, because it is the scientific discipline of the moment. It really is. We talk a lot about change, but anatomy doesn't drive breakthroughs anymore. Biochemistry doesn't drive breakthroughs anymore. Gene technology doesn't drive breakthroughs anymore. It's a combination of a lot of big data and a lot of sophisticated biology and physiology, which makes us, i.e. our gut, our thymus, our spleen, our bone marrow. And that particular discipline is one of the new areas. And actually New Zealand's been very slow to take that on. Australia, the NHMRC funding system is dominated by strong immunology programs. Here in New Zealand, that has never really quite come through. I'll just put that little dig in there. The other reason why it's an thing is because we're now seeing some incredible breakthroughs in the cancer immunotherapy space. And I'll just give you a quick example of that. Here we have Keytruda and Yervoy. They've got unpronounceable names. Basically, they interfere with the way the immune system that exists within us interferes with an emerging cancer cell. You fiddle with that, and you can get really good outcomes, incredible outcomes. That's late-stage melanoma, which would have been a death sentence within 3 or 4 months. You get one of the lucky patients that respond, vroom, it's disappeared, and that person's going to live. Now, it doesn't happen to everyone, but when doctors see that, when patients see that, and relatives see that, that's an era we're now living in. And now immunology is providing solutions not just for cancer, but for autoimmune disease. These are biological things, and also allergies and asthmas and stuff like that. So very exciting time to be an immunologist. So quickly, our programs, we have a cancer research program. We actually try and build things here in New Zealand, not just try and download it from overseas, where we actually try and use living cell vaccines, where you actually take cancer cells, take immune cells, fiddle with them in the test tubes, and put them back into people where they can go and hunt down and kill the cancer. And of course, we borrow extensively from elsewhere. Another important issue, our gut health. That's your gut, and that's all what it can feel like sometimes. What is a good, healthy person? It's a relationship between you, your genes, your environment, and the microbes that live on us and within us. And we actually, it's a lot of things we don't understand there. And clearly, we've changed that over the past 100 years. We are seeing incredible rates of inflammatory diseases appearing. We link it to these things. We don't know enough yet to find out how to actually make things better. I think I've got Mr. Berridge there. Underpinning our translational science and health science, there's Mike there with an incredibly, I think, the largest team, Mike, just studying bits and pieces how a cell works. And this is now emerging to be very important. You never would have predicted a few years ago, but really understanding the basis of cellular life and what determines the energy requirements and what it can and can't do is becoming very important for understanding a whole lot of big things. My own area, parasitic diseases, they're a source of all sorts of problems, but also can be a source of treatments. I've mentioned that already. And also get a sense how to exist in the world, because we raise hope to several groups of people, to people who actually want a better outcome for their health issue, which is cancer or allergy or whatever. And we try and develop things here in New Zealand which actually can get into the bedside, but also commercially. The government, and that's why I asked that question to Paul Goldsmith, because is quite clear. Are they looking for financial and economic outcomes with their science investment? We feel the pressure very much. I don't know whether the other institutions do. We really feel if we can just show, invest in something like an independent institute, we've actually got the fastest way to the market or to a commercialisable outcome, and because we have the nimbleness and the opportunities to engage very quickly, and we don't have the university, whatever they call it, not the commercialisation department looking over us. We can actually really work with the people that can help things develop and go further, and also work with the right kind of hospital authorities without a lot of bureaucracy involved. So that's what we try and do there. Next 5 years, that's just us. And I suppose this is a big issue for us. Be one in New Zealand's cutting edge for biomedical research centre, because New Zealand does need to have one. Other countries have them, and it's actually, they see the outputs there for various reasons, which we can go into later. But the costs of this, because of the globalised science community, are getting far more and more and more. And that's one of the real difficulties we face. Can we at New Zealand really afford to have a cutting edge basic research institute? And that's a big question I have to ask myself every day. We're struggling and hanging on. We don't have a science ecosystem designed for us to survive. We don't have tech funding. We don't, that the universities have, or the CRI capability funding. Whether we can survive long term, I don't know, but just based on philanthropy and a few community people who want to have an institute, we've got to somehow convince we can make a few gains for New Zealand, and maybe there'll be an opportunity to have more supportive. Now, what's happening there? That's nonsense. That's just to give you an idea of the number of people that go through an institute like ours. They're all young, they move on and enrich the community. I think I've said that already. But hope is on the way. New Zealand Independent Research Institutes, IRANs, you need to be aware of this body. It was originally very much institutes that were researching around industry. They use industry levy to drive their activities. The government recently put out a independent research organisation kind of funding scheme for in the regions. God, there's not enough bloody independent researchers in the main centres. But anyway, they've gone for the regions. Good. And you now see, with those people joining this group here, and including Richard Beasley's Medical Research Institute New Zealand, the course on, one could imagine that we are going to build a head of steam that this could become part of the science ecosystem for New Zealand. Be very interesting. It needs to be guided and looked after. And just to show you, this is a graph, of course, and we're scientists, we love graphs. This is publications this way, in the top 10 journal percentiles, field-weighted citation impacts, and there you've got Richard Beasley's Medical Research Institute and the Mulligan. Of course, we're way out on top. The course one's way out on the top compared to the universities and all the other things, but it's not fair. We need them as well. I don't want to be smart-ass. In fact, they could ask, hey, LeGros, why aren't you way out here with all the advantages that you're supposed to have? So I'm not, just take this with a grain of salt. It's not a way of just chipping on the others, just to show that we should be out there because we actually get to do the thing properly. We are doing research for research's sake. I think New Zealand, I'm making the argument New Zealand needs it. Thank you. And to time.
Yeah, damn good timing. Plenty of time for questions. Yes.
You talked about things like Max Planck and so forth. In the NSF, there are a whole lot of independent research organised, funded around that sort of model as well. So I'd just like you to comment a little bit about, in New Zealand, we see these independent research organisations basically focused around applied science. But in the rest of the world, there's a lot of discovery.
Yes, and exactly. We've got to have this cutting-edge science to make the real breakthroughs. They want they want the big wins. You're not going to get that doing the late-stage applied. You need to have that pipeline coming through. You have to recognise, yes, exactly. So we have not made the commitment as New Zealand. We're a small, pragmatic country. We just, put things in. We believe in our universities, and we haven't really understood, and we've always relied on the UK and the Americans to give us access to their basic science discoveries. That won't do us any good.
When you look to commercialise, do you partner with a larger pharmaceutical company for obvious reasons?
No. We look to partner with someone here in New Zealand. We've actually partnered with Powerhouse Venture at the moment. We're trying to build the ecosystem. That's what I mean. We don't necessarily need more money for the Mulligan, but we need more money for the ecosystem to support the power of an independent research organisation. We don't have enough scientists, so when I go back, in the economic space, helping commercialise and develop things so they become useful. There's a lot of science to be done, but we don't. It's not just the discovery in the university. It's the 1,000 things that have to go into something to make it useful all the way out. And we don't have that as a system. We're finding it's very desert-like. And that's why we're going overseas. So we're trying to consciously go through and build an environment here in New Zealand, in Wellington.
All right, I think we'll stop there. Oh, no, we've got a question. Yeah.
Are you saying that it's, I'm just not sure I agree that it's always best to, you find, if there's things that other places around the world are more specialised in or have more experience in, is it not necessarily more beneficial to let them keep working on that, take what they've found and then apply it to your own?
No, it's not. No, don't even say that. We've been saying that for 100 years. But when it came to the soil science in this country, we had to do our own soil science here to put ourselves on the map agriculturally, etc., etc. No, and you've got to understand what a society has to be, and we've actually got to be proud of our institutions. We've actually got to have people that know how to know what's good science, because one of the troubles, unless you have people at the cutting edge, they don't know the wheat from the chaff in terms of what are the good breakthroughs to follow and what's relevant to New Zealand.
Right, well, we'll stop there. Thank you very much, Graham. And I'll ask you later about how to establish an independent paleontological institute. How about that?
But that's a really good point, though. But just imagine how that would inspire you. You could have had such a different life.
No, I am inspired.
Actually, I've got to say,
I'm serious.
one thing. If you know Richard Furneaux, Richard Furneaux's been in the CRI. He's been trapped in a CRI for, I don't know, 100 years? About. I hope this has been recorded, Richard. And he has just recently moved from the IRL, and it's a great place, and set up this Fairy Institute, and he works day and night. He's a man gone wild, but that's a person that should have been leading an independent research institute long ago. New Zealand would have been a better place for it if he had been released from IRL.
Right. See the value of these conferences? All right, next speaker. Brian McMath from NZ Product Accelerator, and the topic is Industry and Science, a New Paradigm for Collaboration. Yeah. Yeah. So your talk is Brian? Yeah. What's it doing? Oh, it's not open. I've got another one here somewhere. There we go. There we go. Okay. So.
Okay, just put it on full screen and click and see something.
Well, thank you very much, and delighted to be here today. And I might add, I was at morning tea, I was very encouraged to see that we've got students here from high school, and I wish when I was going through high school I had the opportunity to attend such a conference as this. So my talk today, and just before I start, I think I was an invisible scientist for about 30 years.
Just make sure that's...
I was an invisible scientist for 30 years, and when I stepped out of corporate life about 10 years ago, I've probably come back into the visible spectrum a little bit now, and you'll see why later. So what are we talking about here? It's really to give you an idea about one particular model of collaboration, and just preface this when I start is that 10 years ago when I opted out of corporate life and pursued some other things, I became involved with the University of Auckland and some projects around funding. And I think we've come a long way in terms of collaboration with industry and science. It's you know, with National Science Challenges, Callaghan Innovation, it's got a lot better, but I still think we've got a long way to go, and I'll touch on that. Okay, so why collaborate? And I'm just going to give an overview of the Product Accelerator, Some key lessons from some global best practices around collaboration. There's a lot of stuff out there. The Danes particularly are good at it. For example, Denmark has a branding position. Denmark, the place for a country of solutions, which I think is kind of cool. And then some controversial stuff from a business perspective aimed at the science community to a degree, and hopefully some younger scientists around might take heed to that, and I'd be interested in some feedback on that. Okay, why collaborate? Well, pretty obvious. Our economy is very small, and if we're too small not to collaborate. We have limited funds. We've got to collaborate to actually make headway into new discoveries. And the beauty of mixed teams is you get a market pull and a science push, and that's most important. You've got to have that market pull. You've got to have relevance, but by getting crossover between the two, and you get that crossover thinking, and it's important to have that. And you see people, you put people in a room from multidisciplines, and they'll particularly, more so industry people who cross over. And it was interesting yesterday, I had the fortune of hearing Kevin Roberts talk. Now, Kevin Roberts, former worldwide CEO of Saatchi, and he spoke at a function, and he said that New Zealand education system, he was comparing it to England and the UK. We're much broader, and I found that when I worked in the UK in business. We cover, because we're a bunch of generalists to a degree, we have a big advantage in this crossover thinking. So that's a big plus for New Zealand. And I think the other thing we've found in the Product Accelerator, that obviously the New Zealand funding model is mate against mate, university against university to some degree. So collaboration is difficult, and you've got to push through barriers and knock heads together at times. But if you go out to industry and you say, look, I'm not from the University of Auckland, but I'm representing a group of scientists, and we're going to find the best people to actually solve your problem, you get much easier uptake. So the latest OECD report was out last week, and it's available online, and I'll just point out the two black lines there that are the most important, where we sit in terms of government, R&D, and secondly, the bottom one is industry financed R&D. And you can see we're not doing particularly well, but we're mid-range in most of each. But I think the value of this report, and I'd recommend you go and read it, is the next bit. And this is extracted straight from that report. And obviously the key points are highlighted there: a low level of collaboration between firms and higher education, between higher education and research institutes, and then support for successful collaboration between research institutes and industry should be maintained or increased. Well, I think they're wrong. It needs to be increased. There's no doubt about in my mind that we can achieve excellent results by doing that. Now, just to touch on the group that I help out, and we call ourselves the Product Accelerator. We were funded 3 years ago by MIMBY, 12.6 million for 6 years. Not a lot of money, but the genesis of our Product Accelerator was the Materials Accelerator. And this was breaking some new ground in terms of collaboration, very much a true partnership between a collaboration of universities and CRIs. And interesting enough, when the cabinet paper went to the government, Stephen Joyce, for the formation of Callaghan Innovation, they referenced the Materials Accelerator as the new model of collaboration they'd like to see. So we were very confident that the Materials Accelerator was a 4-year program, so we were very confident that we might get funded, but we didn't sit on our laurels. But what we did is we tweaked a few things, and one of which was bringing in industrial design. So in our partnership, one of our key partners is the Victoria University School of Design. And one of the things that industry kept saying to us for good product innovation and development, don't forget about the design. The design is the most important aspect. And I'll give you some examples how that's worked. And so that's been very important. And the other thing we did, we pulled together all the additive manufacturing, 3D printing capability in New Zealand academia. And industry is grappling with that at the moment, but I've got one example in particular which is real cool of how we're actually using it to help New Zealand industry. So pulling that together was the couple of tweaks we made, and it helped much. the whole model is driven based on, we have a small team and a project management. And one of the things, your point, Graham, about private institutes, you know, the problem with universities, lecturers are trying to teach, they try and do commercialisation. So we've got a project, so if we enter into a contract with a company, we appoint a project manager. And so the project manager manages the interface, and that smooths the process of actually communicating with the company. Because if you enter into a project with a company, they want results, and fast. So that's the important other thing. The other thing that's been very, very interesting, and I suggest you all go and check it out, is one of the things, you know, in New Zealand, each university, CRIs, have invested in a lot of equipment, testing equipment, you name it. And we thought it was important that we pull that together because we felt it was an untapped resource. And so we formed what we call the National Testing Register. If you go to the Product Accelerator website, you can download that. You would be amazed. We get 3 inquiries a week from that testing register. It's by no means complete, and I'd ask you if you have a look at that. We're more than happy to put your equipment that you have up there, and we've also got companies' equipment, test equipment there. So 3 inquiries a week, and the first question, obviously, can you test this? Well, that's really not the first question, because they're asking that question because, A, they've got a problem, something's wrong with it, so you get behind it. It's been phenomenally successful. We have an advisory board as well, drawn from industry, not a governance board, and that's been very useful in looking to the future particularly. We have 2 roles. We are doing some fundamental research in platforms that we've thought have value for New Zealand for the future, one of which is 3D printing. We've got a number of PhD students we're funding. So we're at both ends of the spectrum actually with how we're using our money, and I'll show you the graph on that now. So we're basically positioned between commercial projects from industry and at the other end of the scale, some fundamental research. Our guiding principles are absolutely 100% alignment with the lead company and one national team, trying presenting that. And the thing is, while we have 6 partners, what we do is go out and basically, I call it my rugby team. So, you know, in a rugby team, we're all different sizes and we're all different capabilities. So what we do is actually, the importance is in pre-qualifying with the customer, the client, industry, what they want. And then we go and actually do some due diligence and find people. And if we don't find them in our research partners, original ones, we go outside. And so we've got projects at the moment running with Otago, running with Canterbury, and also connecting them up with companies. If a company comes to us and says, look, I need help with this, we say, well, look, there's a company around there. We don't even get involved. So actually joining the dots and linking up is very important, because our key performance indicator is not how much funding we bring in, but it's actually what we can do to show that we're demonstrating value to New Zealand companies. So that's a key difference. A shared investment, we share the risk and find the win-win. It's not a free service, so we start off from a position of 50-50, basically, co-funding. That can be in kind, but it's approached on a commercial basis of how much skin in the game the client is prepared to put in. And we're dealing with startups right through to large corporate companies, and so we've got a flexible model to be able to do that. And I guess I mentioned the project directors, and that's very, very important in the process. And if you think about simplifying what we do is actually engage, define, connect, and deliver. So let's just talk about what we've done. So this is 3 years. So we track potential volume, potential value from, and we've identified from, this is not our number, this is from company numbers, about 400 million. And breaking that down with a realistic potential, like any sales process, it's probably half that. 166 companies, 127 projects. Talked about Air New Zealand, 3D printing. Some of you may, Air New Zealand carries $100 million in spare parts, and a lot of those are obviously engines and so on like that. The cocktail tray on the Dreamliner in the business class breaks. I think it's the weight of the champagne bottles personally, but who knows. But if that tray is broken, they can't sell the seat. Then it's loss of revenue. Air New Zealand is a small airline at the end of a long supply chain, and if they can't sell the seat, lost revenue. So what they've had, they buy them in from at an exorbitant cost. We've been 3D printing them for them, and they on demand, and then away they go. Real cool project, great use of the technology to actually thinking 3D printing can have an opportunity for New Zealand around spare parts minimisation. Transpower, this was taken at the field days last week. This is a project that Massey has done at Albany. This is a robot for inspecting remote sites to check on security and some simple tests. I mentioned about design-led projects, Frucor and the Comfort Group. If you haven't heard of the Comfort Group, they're Australasia's biggest bed manufacturer, and I'm sure you've slept on a sleepyhead bed. That's their label. 2 real cool projects, we put 45 final year students through a design project at Victoria. The company pays for it, and they have the right, if there's some products in there, that ideas that come out there, they grab them. And that's the point of bringing design in. And I think the other point about that, without this organisation, the Product Accelerator and our infrastructure, there's no way that Victoria would have connected with 2 companies like that. 2 spin-out companies have come out of our work and associated with the universities. And one of them is Professor Jim Johnson's company, Inhibit Coatings. And Jim's obviously a fellow of the Royal Society. And a company called Compress-Tech, which name you won't find it, but that's a new spin-out as well. Wine Grenade, great story. They won the Velocity Award, well, now the previous Spark Award, Auckland University. They were business school guys, didn't have technology. They took some technology from plant and food. They needed help, and what it is, it's a micro-oxidation process for aging red wine. The middle market of red wine is not, as you think, aged in oak barrels. It's done by commercial micro-oxidation. This is a little simple system which basically is a tube that goes into a tank. It uses the Internet of Things from Smart Control. We helped them with the polymer and the micro-oxidation rate. Done a lot of work with Gallagher's, the electric fencing company, 4 new novel products. And then talking about the board, I mentioned the role of our board, challenged us to think about tomorrow's economy, we've called it. Some really out there commercial driven projects that could actually offer what we call sticky industries for New Zealand. One of which Scion are leading is called Plantabot. And this is actually using a range of companies who already exist. Those, I don't know who, anybody go to the agricultural field days? Okay, you should, it's a must visit. All scientists should go there. A robot for picking kiwi fruit. So there's a company there called Robotics Plus. So what we're looking at is actually tomorrow's economy, really out there in the distance, but a device for actually planting trees on very difficult terrain. New Zealand, we heard about New Zealand's lagging behind in our carbon reduction. Well, we certainly are. And the other one, and Pamela, you'll be interested in this, literally we found 3 men in a shed. Divers who built an unbelievable underwater robot. We were in the Coromandel with them about 3 weeks ago looking at the mussel farms. And then they've been down in Big Glory Bay before the scare down there, looking at salmon nets. Interesting enough, they have developed a camera which they have just sold one to MIT in the US. Unbelievable little company. So this is what we're finding, and part of the company, if you want to have a look at it, the company's called Boxfish Research, and we're actually talking to MPI at the moment, Pamela, about a little project utilising that. But their camera technology is world class, and we found them through the Wine Grenade. Actually, one of the engineers had done some work for Wine Grenade, and then we're hosting, and I'll get this left field thinking, we host innovation days for company, and so it wasn't only showcasing university. We had the guys from Boxfish bring it in. All 28 kilo robot, one man can launch it himself, unlike what else is on the market. And they were there. So this is this linking up of companies in New Zealand industry helping us through. So what have we learned? As I said, collaboration is difficult. Don't assume it's occurring. Because of our funding model, it's difficult. If we're going to get industry on board, you've got to go right to the CEO. Our first stance, if we're talking to a company, if you don't have the CEO buy-in, you're most times wasting your time, because he's the guy who signs the checks. And business, this sort of game is all about, it's not rocket science, it's about relationships. You've got to build trust. You know, are you capable of actually delivering what a company wants? Business is about relationships, and this is part of this. And IP management, don't get hung up on that. Whoops, what's going on here? Oh, it's on your screen, not mine. So don't get hung up about IP. And obviously I mentioned project teams, continued alignment, and the industry advisory board. Okay. This is sort of global best practice, and I've touched on some of them, but university CRI leadership is vital in this if we're going to actually enhance collaboration and long-term strategic partnerships. Interesting, I mentioned the projects with Frucor and the Comfort Group. They've done 4. They've come back after starting, and they're so pleased with what they've got, they've come back for more. There's a couple of products that they've taken from those ideas that are in the stream of actually coming out and becoming part of their group, their company. And so a shared vision, you know, and develop a strategy for going forward with what you might do. The cross-fertilisation of ideas is so important. I just can't emphasise that enough. Mixing up people, don't get hung up on IP, and promote a multidisciplinary approach to learning, and don't get hung up on the results of measuring the results of the strategic partnership. Okay, some final passing thoughts. What should we do? And this is pitched more at scientists rather than anything. I think scientists should have some basic sales training. Absolutely critical. If you think about the funding model, it's about pitching and so on like that. I think some basic sales training is very, very important going forward, and particularly for young people who have some idea that they'd like to have a startup or start a, you know, that's so important. And expose graduates and academics to the funding ecosystem, angels, venture capital, etc. I'm a member of the Ice Angels group in Auckland, so there's about 160 people, and we look for investment opportunities. We don't get enough technical ones coming through. So that's very, very important. And I say to young people today, you're so fortunate in terms of, while it's tough and we don't give up our money easily because we've earned it the hard way, but there's this ecosystem now of funding that is available, and go and, you know, expose it. So that is so important if we're going to do that. And we want young, bright scientists starting companies, because that's going to deliver results for New Zealand. Networking. At this conference, probably a lot of you know each other, but speed, you might sound, what a corny idea. Speed networking. 2 minutes, introduce each other, tell them what you're doing. That way you link people up, and particularly if you've got industry coming in, you know, corny idea, it works, I tell you. And you know, the scientists can talk about that, and the industry person, you might get a hook there somewhere. It's all about that linking up. And we need to promote academic startup heroes like Jim Johnson, like David Williams in Auckland, who've had a series of startups. Encourage postgraduate students to join the industry, which is, we see you school guys here today, and targeted open industry innovation days really work, where you pitch some technologies, have an idea about the company, and then you build that relationship from there. That's my finish, but I want to do one market survey. I'm a Rotarian and very much involved in the Rotary Summer Science School. And I know there's some students here who heard about it. Could you just put up your hand if you've heard of the Rotary National Summer Science Forum? Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're bang on time, so I'm just wondering if we should press on. How is the ecosystem inside people's stomachs? I think we'll, if that's right, we'll just address questions later with Brian.
I've got to disappear, so...
Oh, do you?
Yeah, I'm going to Mimby, so if people want to contact me, I'd be delighted to email if I can help you in any way.
Are you not going to be here for lunch?
No, I've got
Well, maybe you should take some questions. All right, any burning questions?
So see.
The ecosystem prevails. All right. our last speaker, I got my glasses. Sally Garrett, everyone, and let's move this. See how much support. Right, Sally's from the Defence Technology Agency, and the talk is supporting the New Zealand Defence Force at home and away. Sally, last speaker, 20 minutes and then lunch.
No pressure or anything to get done. First of all, thank you for giving me the opportunity today to come and talk to you a little about what we do at the Defence Technology Agency to support the New Zealand Defence Force at home and away. The Defence Technology Agency, some of you may know about us. We're a lab of about 100 scientists based at the Devonport Naval Base. We're a business unit of the New Zealand Defence Force, and we report directly to the Chief of Defence Force. Our primary mission is to be the main provider of science and technology support to the New Zealand Defence Force and the Ministry of Defence. The Ministry of Defence are the people who buy our assets, so our ships and aircraft. Our methods are kind of like a consultancy, but sometimes like a big brother. We provide frank and independent advice without hesitation. So basically, if we see the Defence Force doing something that we feel that they could do better, we tell them. We have a culture with our military counterparts of mutual respect. They are the subject matter experts in everything military, but we want to create teams with them and have a friendship to enable us to be able to give them advice. And finally, we're continually seeking approaches to produce transformative outcomes for you, the taxpayer. So that's about making sure our sailors, soldiers and aircrew are safe, that they're efficient, and that we're doing the best thing that we can with the taxpayer dollar. In terms of the type of activities that we, or the type of scientists we have at DTA, we range from, I myself am an environmental scientist, but we also have physiologists, engineers, chemists, a huge diversity of different scientists all in one place. So today, rather than giving you a wiring diagram, which is what engineers love to do, I've decided to talk about our support to one operation, and that operation is Operation Castle, which is when the Navy sends an offshore patrol vessel each year to the Antarctic, to the Ross Sea, to support MPI with their fishing inspections for toothfish boats. Pamela spoke about it earlier. So this is under the CAMLR Fish Inspection Treaty. Navy's primary role in this is to be a home for the MPI fisheries officers, to provide them a way to get there, and to look after them while they're there and to bring them home safely. We're pretty much newcomers compared to the fishermen in the Ross Sea, as we only returned there after a 40-year hiatus in 2011. Operating in the Southern Ocean and Ross Sea is one of the most extreme activities the New Zealand Defence Force does, and as such they require considerable help to make sure they're safe and efficient. So I'm just going to talk about two completely different areas of support that we do for Op Castle. One of them is related to human performance, and that is to do with making sure when our sailors and MPI fisheries officers are in the Ross Sea, that if something was to go wrong, that we have the right equipment on board the ship to make sure we can get those people back. So for any of you who watch the news, in 2011 the Russian fishing boat, the Sparta, became entrapped in ice. She hit an iceberg and ripped the side of her ship open. Even though there was quite a few fishing boats close, nobody could get to her for over 10 days because of the ice conditions. And the ship's company had to take refuge, had to take refuge in a bunch of life rafts on the side of the ship. This is a photo taken from one of our Hercules. They were able to drop pumps and other such spares to the ship, and in the end she self-rescued. But one of the things that became really apparent to us is that going to the Southern Ocean and then the Ross Sea is that we really need to be very, very self-sufficient. And while there has been an evolution in the legislation to do with the equipment that you need for going to polar regions, it doesn't really take into consideration the Southern Hemisphere. So the International Maritime Organisation have a polar code. The New Zealand Defence Force is the only defence force in the world to accept it, and we now operate under it. And it says if you have a survival craft, whether it be a life raft or a lifeboat, that it should be capable of effectively evacuating your ship's company and being able to look after them for a maximum expected time of rescue. And they say in the Northern Hemisphere that's 5 days. Well, realistically for us it could be 15. This became a bit of a concern to us because, you know, we want to make sure we do the best for our people, and we suddenly realised that maybe the equipment we had we weren't using as effectively as we could. So the physiologists in the lab came together with the engineers who were having a bit of a panic because they'd gone through the literature and found that there was no studies of anybody surviving in a life raft more than 48 hours in the conditions that we operate in. And they said, it's okay, we've just got to make sure that we maintain people's body temperature, that they've got enough food, and that where they're staying is a good place. So we have two primary pieces of equipment that we use in the Ross Sea for survival. We have a different type of life raft with an insulated floor and a personal immersion suit. This is our big engineer Sam. He's 7 feet tall and we could fit him into the immersion suit. That was great. He does look a little bit like a lobster. We then went through getting a whole ship's company, so 80 sailors and fisheries officers, and throwing them off the wharf in winter in their immersion suits to see what would happen to them. What we found out very quickly is the immersion suits we had, and which are the same ones used by the fishing boats and also other tourist operators going to the Ross Sea, actually didn't fit the New Zealand population very well, and most of them would fill up with water. So we've rapidly changed our immersion suits and are looking at ways to reduce the accumulation of water within them, because not only do you get leakage in through your arms, but you can imagine if you're staying in your suit for 15 days, there could be other sources of leakage into your suit. So we're looking at some new technologies with some other organisations, like water absorbers that you can shove down into the suit to try and get rid of the moisture once it gets there, and coming up with some guidelines on what clothing to wear inside immersion suits. And we're going to be giving that information out freely to the New Zealand science community to assist people like Niwa. We've also been looking at the shivering response. The shivering response, our physiologists found, was enough to increase survival of people in life rafts for up to 5 days. But the big problem is it takes about 12,000 kilojoules a day to shiver. And if you look at the amount of food in a life raft, there's only 4,000 kilojoules. So it's these simple things, these really simple pieces of advice that we can give maritime operators that might increase their chance of survival. The final thing that we're working on now, and I just wonder whether it be only a defence force who could get away with doing this, is looking at ventilation. Life rafts are enclosed, and what happens in a life raft is all the people sitting there can actually increase the temperature to a temperature where people can survive for a much longer time. The problem is, however, it also fills up with carbon dioxide and water, and so people feel claustrophobic and sick. They open the hatch and all of the good heat that they've created goes out the window, literally. So a study in Canada that by one of our partner organisations said for a 50-man life raft with 25 people in it, they can increase the temperature by 5 degrees, and that would be enough to enable our crew to survive an extra 2 days in the Ross Sea. So in August this year, we were actually putting 60 people in 2 50-man life rafts, and we're leaving them out for a few days to test these theories. Apparently, they're volunteers. So it's just trying to show you why we're doing this kind of core research. It's because there's nobody else who's really interested in these problems that we're having in the Ross Sea, and so we've got to fill the gap ourselves. The other big thing that we're struggling with, and I know from going to Niwa but also speaking to the fishing boats, is really the operational conditions that we're seeing in the Southern Ocean. So some of you may have seen this. This is HMNZS Otago in the northern Ross Sea. 6 hours prior to this, they had been actually doing fisheries inspections. A low came off out of the Ross Sea, and they saw. Oh, by the way, the camera is about 18 metres off the sea. So they saw what they believe is 18 to 20 metre waves. They're in 105 knots average for 12 hours. So these operational conditions are fairly extreme. The Southern Ocean waves are fairly not well understood, and it really is, for us, a real concern. So we've been working with a partner organisation called MedOcean because waves have never been measured south of New Zealand. The furthest south wave measurements in the world are at 47, which is about the same latitude as the south of Stewart Island. And we have to go 1,200 miles further south than that into the Ross Sea. So in December 16, we decided that we were going to put a wave buoy into the Southern Ocean at Campbell Island, 52 south, because there was no measurements. And we really are focused on putting this buoy here to help us increase our understanding of waves and to hopefully increase the accuracy of forecasts. So it's a permanent mooring. Well, so they say. Whether the mooring lasts the winter, I don't know. And it's really focused on, as I said, validation. We're very lucky to have the Office of Naval Research providing us a grant to make this happen. But more importantly, when we're talking about industry, even though we're part of the Defence Force, specific ship acquisition projects have also stumped up cash to make this happen. So what have we seen from our Southern Ocean wave buoy? Well, the good news is it's still there, and it's still going. But we've seen two events with really large waves. The first in March, we saw a 15.8 metre wave, and then in May we saw a 19.4 metre wave. And just to put that into perspective of what that means if you were looking at it, this is a picture or a schematic from the World Met Organization about it. So when I take sailors and try to explain to them what I do, we have a 6-storey building on base, and I always go and make them stand next to that and say the wave was bigger than the building. In terms of the wider application to defence and maybe to other organisations who go down the path of building a ship for the Ross Sea, the biggest thing that we've discovered so far is the frequency of high sea states is much greater than what we expected or has been modelled previously. When we were previously designing ships, we expected 6 to 9 metre waves 7 days a year. 6 to 14 metre waves 7 days a year, and we're now looking at more like 43. This is in the summer season. And also, we hadn't previously ever measured waves over 16 metres, and now it looks like a probability of about 1 day a year we'll see these massive waves. That's what I have.
Thank you, Sally. Well, we're back within time. How about that? Any questions?
Really interesting research. I was just thinking in terms of the North Pole and thinking about how much activity there is around there. And you're saying that all of the Russians and Norwegians and Canadians and all those people that are operating up there commercially, that they don't have this kind of survival gear that you're developing, or they haven't done research into surviving in those conditions in maritime environments?
Well, the real difference is with the Ross Sea is that because it's 2,000 miles from the New Zealand mainland, and because primarily you can't get rescued to the land there, we're in a much more isolated position. So even the Antarctic Peninsula isn't, if you go to the Antarctic Peninsula, you're better off. They can helicopter rescue to the land there. So even though our ship would be close to the land, we can't be rescued to the Antarctic continent. Yeah, so that's why we have to do things slightly differently. Yep. Yep.
How is communication over there? Is it radio or satellite or?
In the Ross Sea?
Yeah.
So actually communication is a really difficult thing in the Ross Sea, because all of our ships, not only do they go all the way down south, but they go all the way up north too. And so the primary method we use of communication is a geosynchronous satellite. And so it's really good at the equator. But when you go down south, you fall off the footprint, and that was actually one of the learnings of the first time we went down south, is that we actually fell out of our normal communication method, and we had to go back to using HF radio, which I believe they used in the Second World War. But luckily, we still had those skills on board and the equipment. So communications is really difficult. Yep.
Would communications be like an next step for something you want to improve in case, you know, something does happen?
Yeah, absolutely. So since that time when we had the problem in 2011, we actually take a different type of satellite now, which the satellites go over the poles, so there's better coverage. And we're also looking at some other methods of communicating. So as I said, we went back to our HF radios, and so we're getting much better at using those again. Yep. Yep.
Research into wave level, Ross Sea and so on. Is that, are you going to factor in sea level rise over time? Yeah. Are you planning to consider just how sea level is going to be very high?
Yeah, so the wave buoy we've put in is in the middle of the deep ocean, and it will probably only last for a little while because we'll get the mooring will break and it will go away. But we're just looking at the fluctuations in the height of the sea. We're not really concerned at this time about sea level rise. It's not really the right piece of equipment for doing that. Yep.
Just wondering, with those massive 16-metre waves, how do you use that information to the ships or captains? What do they do with that? Are they just not trying to be there?
Yeah. Well, absolutely, and I mean that's one of the things about this area is when we originally looked at ship observations, interestingly, most of these areas in the Southern Ocean, there is no observations of really large sea state because people try not to be there at that time. But in terms of how our operators at the moment, how they will benefit, first of all, we're trying to improve forecast models for them. But the primary use of those really high sea states is that, as many of you would be aware, the government came out with a white paper for defence. We're about to build a tanker to supply Scott Base and McMurdo, and also a new vessel specifically for going to the Ross Sea. And we need to know the specifics of those waves to create a design that's going to be as effective as possible.
Any other questions? Sally, one from me. How big is DTA?
Right, so there's 100 of us, 100 scientists, technologists as we call them, engineers and our support staff. So we're actually, this is a good thing to say, we've actually got quite a few vacancies. So, so as an organisation, we're actually not full house at the moment. Yeah.
Thank you. All right. Well, I think you'll agree, everyone. We've heard 4 very unusual talks this morning. They're not invisible to us any longer. Well, I'll just express it that way. Anyway, we better stop for lunch. And Craig, when do you want to resume? In about 50 minutes. So let's try and start again at about 1:30. Okay. So just join in with me in thanking our speakers. Thank you.